Hi everyone, welcome back to the composition lecture part 2. Yesterday we talked about 4 different compositional rules. Number 1 was rule of thirds, right? You divide your photo into 9 equal areas and then place your subjects along the lines. Rule number 2 was simplicity, which asks you to get rid of all the clutter and have one strong subject in your photographs. Rule number 3 was line, and we talked about four different types of line. We talked about leading lines, which lead your eye to a point of interest. We talked about vertical lines, which create feelings of power and dominance. We talked about horizontal lines, which convey feelings of stability and rest. And then we talked about curved lines and how they create a lot of energy in our photographs. Okay. Then rule number 4, we talked about framing. We said to put framing elements around the outside of your photograph in order to isolate your subject and draw the viewer's eye to a point of interest. So today we are going to talk about our last 3 compositional rules, and we're going to start that off with orientation. I like to call orientation the forgotten rule because it's the one that my students always have a hard time remembering. And to me, it's actually one of the most important rules. So orientation tells us that we need to pay attention to the orientation of our subject. Ms. Russell, what does orientation mean? Well, I like to use the example of when you are printing a document, let's say on Word, right? And you're able to go to your print setup page, and then you're able to choose your orientation, right? Are you going to do portrait or are you going to do landscape? Portrait means vertical, up and down. Landscape means horizontal, side to side. Now, if you think about those terms, those are not unique to Microsoft Word or to Google Docs. In fact, those terms came from art, right? Because what is a portrait? A portrait is an image of a human being or of a person. A landscape is an image of the land, okay? But they're both images. So those terms came from art, which tells us that traditionally portraits were taken vertically and traditionally landscapes are taken horizontally, right? Think about the reasons why, and this should help you remember orientation. Why would a human being be photographed vertically? Think about it. Because a human being is a vertical subject, right? Think about it. You are a vertical subject. You go up and down. So the best way to take a photograph of a human is vertically, which is why we call that portrait. Landscape, on the other hand, is taken horizontally because landscapes are typically horizontal subjects. You have a horizon line in the background, mountains, trees, what have you. Those are horizontal subjects, okay? You have a camera in your hand at all times, right? Most of you, if you have a cell phone. Our natural inclination is to hold our cameras vertically because that's the more comfortable way to hold it. It kind of feels awkward switching it and taking it horizontally. But the problem is that most of the photos on your camera roll are going to be vertical because that's the natural way you hold it. Same thing goes with a digital camera. Most of the photos taken on a digital camera are often taken horizontally because that's the natural way you hold a digital camera. I want you to not allow your device, don't allow your camera to determine how you take your photograph, okay? Because it's more natural for me to hold my camera vertically, that should not be the reason that I take photos vertically. I should look at my subject. Is my subject a vertical subject, or is my subject a horizontal subject? Your subject should determine the orientation, vertical or horizontal. Your subject should determine the orientation of your photograph, not the camera. Okay? A good rule of thumb with orientation is to take the photographs both ways. Okay? So if it's a vertical subject, absolutely take it vertically, but take it horizontally too and see what looks better. I guarantee you that typically it's going to look better based on your subject's orientation. Let me give you an example. Like we said, a human is a vertical subject. So you'll notice on the photo on the left-hand side, our subject is a human, so that was shot vertically. What happens then when we take a photo of our vertical subject horizontally? You'll notice the top of his head gets cut off, okay? So obviously in this photograph, what's the better option? The better option is to take it vertically because our subject is vertical. Now you could argue, I look at that, and if I were to step back and keep the top of his head, it might be nice to see his shoulders and all of that. So that's why I always encourage you to take it both ways and see which one looks better. But the general rule of thumb with orientation is look at your subject. If they're vertical, take the photo vertically. If they're horizontal, take the photo horizontally. All right, let's move on to our sixth compositional rule. This one's a lot of fun. This is viewpoint or otherwise known as perspective. They're synonyms. Those words are interchangeable. Okay, so viewpoint and perspective says that changing our perspective, changing the view from which we take our photograph, right? Again, this goes back to orientation. Like, it's natural for us to hold our cameras this way. It's also natural for us to take our photos at eye level because that's where we hold our camera. Ditch that idea. Take your photos at all kinds of angles. Take them from down below. Take them from up above. Take them from the side, right? Turn your camera a little bit. Move your body. Put your bodies up above your subject. Put your bodies down below. I cannot tell you how many times I have laid in the grass and gotten muddy to get that money shot, okay? Change your perspective. It's going to create more visually interesting photographs, right? By taking a photo from up above, like looking down at our subject, we call that a bird's eye view. From taking our photos from down below, which means looking up at our subject, think about, I said I like to lay in the grass. That's a bug's eye or a snail's eye view, all right? You can get so creative and get some really amazing photographs if you just play with perspective. Let's look at a couple of examples, okay? Left-hand side of the airplane, looking from down below, we call that what? A bird's eye or a snail's eye view. Look at the amazing perspective that gives you. Look at how much more visually interesting that photograph is because we changed the perspective, okay? Photo number 2, obviously taken from up above, we call that a bird's eye view. I want you to imagine if this photo had been taken from ground level at eye level, would you be able to see all those amazing lines? Would you be able to get the movement in that photograph that you get if you had taken it at eye level? No, you would have just gotten a person walking across a crosswalk in a yellow jacket. That would have been the focus, okay? But now when we take it from up above, we see this really visually interesting and graphic image because we took it from that bird's eye view. So move your body. Stand up on things, okay? Don't hurt yourselves, but get yourself up high. Stand up on top of things. Take photos from up above. Lay on the ground. Get dirty, okay? Take photos from down below. You're going to create some amazing photographs. I wanted to throw these ones in here. Obviously, these were taken from drones. These are drone shots, but still, this is considered that bird's eye view. Look at how amazing these photographs are. Do you think that at eye level, at ground level, you would get these beautifully interesting images? No, you wouldn't be able to see just this super intricate, complex web of roads if you were standing at ground level. You wouldn't be able to even see this shipwreck, most likely, if you were standing at ground level and taking your photos at eye level. I just went on a trip this summer, a road trip up the coast. I towed my trailer behind me. I didn't tow it, my husband did. We towed our trailer behind us, and my husband is the videographer out of the two of us. I take the photographs, he takes the videos, and he recently got a drone. And so he used the drone all through our trip, and it just like took our family videos, it like took them to the next level because getting that visual perspective of up above makes things so much more interesting. So get up high. Okay, take those photos from up above, take them from down below. I know I'm a broken record, but change your perspective and your viewpoint. Our last compositional rule today is balance. And this does not mean that these are the only rules of composition. We're just going to cover 7 of the main ones. There are a lot of other compositional rules, but I want to give you some that are easy to throw into your photography toolkit today. Okay, so balance. Balance goes hand in hand with rule of thirds. Let me jump to a photograph and I'll go back to that other slide. This photo follows the rule of thirds, right? Our subject is placed off center. And it supposedly creates a more visually interesting image. Some of you may be looking at this image and thinking to yourselves, wow, that's boring. That's where balance comes in. Balance says that by placing our subject off center, as suggested by the rule of thirds, it can create that visual interest, but it can also make our images feel a bit empty and a bit boring. So balance says, take your strong focal point and then balance it with a subordinate element. Okay, so you want to have one strong focal point in the foreground, but then put something else off to the side or in the background, something smaller, a subordinate element, in order to balance out the elements in your photo and create a more interesting image. Okay, make sure those elements, by the way, work together. You don't want two opposing elements, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Okay, so here's balance. We have our dominant focal point in the foreground, that rusty, let me move my webcam so you can see it better. Okay, so you have that rusty sign, that rusty out sign in the foreground. That's our dominant element, our dominant subject, our focal point. But if we had just that sign in the image, it could create a really empty composition, a really empty kind of boring photo. So by placing that background, by placing that building in the background kind of off to the side, it balances out the sign and creates more visual interest. The last part of balance says that make sure your elements go together. Notice these are both pieces of architecture. One is a sign, one is a building. Those go together, right? You don't want competing elements. You don't want like, I don't know. I like to give the example of if you have this really beautiful photo of like a beach, right? And you have a palm tree in the foreground serving as your focal point, and then in the background maybe you have like a beach chair, someone sitting in a beach chair, like you know, sipping a drink on the beach. Now those two elements go together. If in the background you had like a car, right? The car is like, whoa, that doesn't belong, right? A car on a beach, that doesn't belong there. That doesn't go with the whole vibe of the photograph. So make sure that your two elements go together in balance, okay? Another example, we have our dominant focal point in the foreground, okay? This rock on a beach scene. And then in the background, back in the right-hand side, it's balanced by other rocks, okay? So it creates that visual balance, dominant subject in the foreground, subordinate element in the background, okay? That's what balance asks us to do. Because otherwise, if we just had one focal point, that can be a little empty and boring. So add some subordinate elements in the background to make your photo more visually interesting. Here's what balance is not, okay? Whenever I give this project and I ask students to go take photos that show balance, I get people balancing things. This is balance in the real world, right? Like smaller rocks balanced on top of bigger rocks, but this is not balance in the photography world. Balance in the photography world asks us to have a dominant subject balanced in the background by a subordinate element, okay? Do not, and I repeat, do not submit photos to me for balance in which you are balancing your subjects on top of each other, okay? Because too often my students will Google, okay, photo of balance, and this is what you're gonna find, so then they go copy it. That shows me that you do not understand what balance is, okay? So make sure that you are coming back to my examples to help guide you on what your images should look like. Okay, that is going to end our lecture on composition. Thank you for joining me the last 2 days. Remember that following this lecture, you should be taking your quiz, your compositional lecture quiz, and you'll find it in Schoology. So please pop on over while the information's fresh in your head. You can use your notes, but make sure you do that quiz and you get that turned in so that I can give you a grade. Bye, everybody.